So we're here with the final installment of the Skywalker saga. Was it all worth it? Let's talk about it. If you've seen podcast 4, you'll know that I'm pretty burnt on Star Wars right now. Because I've always been a casual fan at the end of the day. I grew up with the prequels, but I mainly watched the originals, and they were the films that I always did gravitate to, because despite the problems the prequels had, they were fun, entertaining films in their own way. But Star Wars, the original 3 films, were just those special 3 movies that had so much good going for them. And sure, you can pick apart flaws in logic, or characters' choices, or many more things to go with them. But what's so special about those movies is just that, at the end of the day, they are good films in their own way. And they're good because they have what every story in this series needs, especially when it comes to consistent Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 stories, trilogies in this case, is a vision. With the prequels, they equally had a vision, and some of it could have been handled much better. That's pretty obvious. But everyone kind of now understands that despite those prequels and the problems with the dialogue and some of the characters, at the end of the day, it's telling a story. The story of the fall of a tragic man, a Jedi who wanted to help people and those he loved, and in doing so, he became the one we all fear. Honestly, if I'm being brutally honest here right now, looking away from my script here, I'm really not bothered at all. I really cannot give a damn at all, because the main thing that's kind of killed Star Wars for me right now is just the handling of the franchise from the people behind it, behind the suits, and the makers themselves, a few of them too. Because how they've treated the fans in the last 2 years since we've made our voices known. Because there were people as far back as The Force Awakens saying they didn't like it for various reasons, but you could argue it was a bit of a more lesser minority, because at the end of the day, the majority were excited for the franchise to return. But when they started to see more of the problems representing more on screen, it really did push a lot of fans away, and you'd think that the team behind it would try and take that into consideration and try and mend the relationship, try and find a way to apologise without, of course, being a big corporation, officially apologising. But instead, they went out of their way to not do anything, as the filmmakers, other people, so many other people just basically went out of their way to attack the fans, to basically say they were named, to call them names, to say they were this and that because they didn't like the movie or the direction they wanted to head it to. But you look at the film series now, in its complete trilogy format, it just doesn't really mesh together like a full story, unlike the original films. And here's the argument people try and always jump to. The original trilogy didn't have a plan involved. It was made up on the way as it went along. Yes, but that was made back then. It was the first trilogy. It was the trilogy that started it all. George Lucas wasn't a time traveler. He didn't know this was going to become a franchise. He just wanted to tell a story, his story, and he had an idea, and he built upon it. The prequels too. They had a vision of telling this prequel story origin about this young boy, this Anakin Skywalker, and that was his vision. He added on it too, but at the end of the day, that was the vision, that what people expected from that trilogy, and that's what they wanted to see. With the sequel trilogy, it was going to be the story of what happens after. It had to be the story about where is our main characters now, who are they fighting, and why are they fighting for it. And Disney just wanted to do their own thing, and they gave it to people who, sure, some of them will all understand Star Wars, more so than others, but this trilogy does really feel like it wasn't intended to be for everyone. And that's the main problem, because when you're dividing people up, when you're not bringing them together, that's going to make conflict. But, okay, sorry, we now get to the actual movie itself, because I guess what I'm trying to just say is that I really don't care, because I went to see this movie with Lennon, and he was going to be in here for the discussion video, because it's more fun to talk with other people about these kind of things, but he was busy, and rightly so, because it's near the end of the year at this point. I sat through the movie, and I just really didn't care. I wasn't invested in a lot of things, because what's set up in the earlier movies, there wasn't really any build to it, in regards to the characters at least. Now, with Rey, of course, it's pretty much known here too, I've not been a fan of Rey, and kudos to Daisy Ridley for cheering through it. She is a great actress, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she will do next in the big Hollywood business. And I think she's definitely earned a lot of respect from fans and everyone else for doing a good job with her character. But the character itself is what I hate so much, because you can't really relate to her. You can relate to her in areas if you just watch the opening scene of Force Awakens with her and how she lives her day-to-day life when she doesn't say any line of dialogue. You know what, actually, this is turning into more of a Let's Talk, so I actually don't want to do that, because at the end of the day, this is something that's going to be reserved for a future video next year. And that is coming next year, don't worry, Star Wars podcast or whatever. But, yeah, sorry. Long-winded rant over whatever you want to call this. Get to the point now. Talking about Rise of Skywalker. In the end, I wasn't invested in this movie from the beginning, because after The Last Jedi, I didn't care, because it just didn't feel like it didn't do anything to advance the story. Now with this movie, it's basically a chase quest. It's basically them trying to find these MacGuffins to get to this point, because they need to get to the Emperor. And, yeah, spoiler alert here, he's back. Who has not been teased at all or set up in the previous two movies. And again, the fact that they basically just give away that the Emperor's back in the opening crawl alone kind of sets up how this movie tries to rush a lot of the concepts that should have been put into The Last Jedi. Because, again, natural progression for these stories. The first film was to introduce these new characters. Natural direction to go after would be to have the sequel, have The Last Jedi, be the revelation, have everyone go through their trauma, their troubles, their moments of grief. And in the end, we find out the answers. Who is Snoke? Who is the bad guy of this trilogy? And if the Emperor was always going to be in this trilogy, which I do not believe, but if he was, that would have been the time to introduce him. Or, heck, do anything to foreshadow something. But in the end, this film basically just had to go back, look at points of the previous movies and say, that would work if we retcon that to make him the mastermind. And it just does not work. Especially when you're a fan and you know what those things were setting up. I mean, you look at Snoke too. Again, going back to Force Awakens. It's explained in supplement material, in and behind the scenes in books or whatever. I can't pick up the source, but there's supplement material out there that explains that Darth Sidious knew of Snoke's existence. He didn't know him or what he'd become, but he knew in some form he would succeed him, and he also knew that something out there was in the unknown regions. And we know that Snoke himself has been around for God knows how long, but during the era of he was around during the prequels era. This film is just basically trying to fix a lot of the problems that was basically discarded that was set up in Force Awakens, but not continued into The Last Jedi. I guess I'll get back into format now, because I think I'm gonna keep going into a tangent at this point if I keep doing this off script. But for the story, you can see what they're trying to do, the story they're trying to tell, and you can say for a casual viewer it's fine, but it's very fast paced, and it doesn't really give you time to breathe and give you a chance to really meet with these characters and feel their connection, the journey they've been on together. And that just gets very frustrating very fast if you're not a fan of fast-paced movies. When you want to take a moment to breathe and take in the atmosphere, take in the setting, take in the story and the characters. And there's plenty of callbacks too, which can be fun, but the problem is a lot of it is very obvious. And look at The Mandalorian as an example of how to do it right, because it's basically benefiting the story. It's there for fan service, obviously, but their story is followed through. They're following their own story set up. It just happens to have these cool memories that we'll remember from the old films. With this film, basically half of it is basically trying to recapture our nostalgia for the old films, because its own story is trying to chug through to the next step. And the logic too just doesn't make sense. We find out the Emperor's back. They never really explain how. There's one passing line where you could argue it's them basically explaining it, in that he repeats himself from Revenge of the Sith, which is again another callback there. But that doesn't exactly explain it. Is it meant to imply that we knew that Palpatine was able to master what Darth Plagueis taught him? Because if that's the case, wouldn't you think that would have been a big thing to talk about or explain, or at least touch upon it in Last Jedi? But it's just really brushed aside. We don't really know, and there's so much more. The fact that he announces his return to the galaxy, which pretty much sets up his doom, because everyone then finds out, and that's what starts this story off. And also the fact that it's set 1 year. Just 1 year after the events of Last Jedi. And it's just, come on. The original trilogy had 3 years apart from the first and second film, and a year passed between the second and third film. That's a good number of years for the characters and the world to grow, to develop, that we can make us care about them more. We see their progression. And even though we don't see Luke's training, or all of Luke's training, or we see how some characters get from A to B, it feels more natural because there's a passage of time, and how they interact with each other shows on screen. Again, the final movie in this trilogy, I still really can't connect with Rey, Finn and Poe as a dynamic team. It was fun, because it was nice to actually see this main cast of this trilogy together, but because they didn't set up right, they didn't basically put them all together in the first movie, and from there build on together, it just really feels like, again, last minute catch up. You didn't do it in the previous movies, so now you're doing it now. But I will say, I did enjoy Finn and Poe's dynamic. They continue to be one of the highlights of this trilogy for me, because you really bought their fast friendship in the first film, and you definitely felt a sense that they were good friends. And I really liked that, because I can relate to that with my own friends. And, in truth, Poe Dameron actually does remind me of some of my friends. But they're just so much fun to watch. And when all the other stuff comes on, it's just like, it's part of the story they're trying to tell. But I enjoyed their dynamic. I enjoyed what they did with the story, and I enjoyed that they at least got to have a role in this saga. But with Rey, again, a year and a few days have passed in the span of the story they're telling, since she essentially found out everything about the Jedi, and who Luke Skywalker was, because she thought he was a myth. And now she's essentially pulling off powers that advanced Jedi, which take years to learn, should have mastered. But you can see why I'm going with it. It's difficult to really feel related to this character when she's learning stuff that don't make sense with the narrative they've been set up with. I can buy that, again, she spent a year reading ancient Jedi texts that maybe have secret powers or teachings that Jedi wouldn't have learned for years or whatever. But again, just a year. Sure, a lot can happen in a year, but when you're dealing with a story that involves space wizards and laser swords, and the in-universe explanation is that they have to train and master these advanced skills for years, it's got to be more difficult than just a year of sword playing and meditating. You've got to feel that sense of growth. And the fact that she's able to do that all in just a year and a few days, it just gets really annoying. It's more frustrating for me because I want to relate to this character. I want to cheer her on, to say, I hope you survive this. I hope you learn these cool powers. I hope you become the next generation. I hope you become the new Luke Skywalker. But what they ended up doing was basically making her Luke Skywalker, the rip-off of Luke Skywalker, but he has no flaws. And that's not fun. It's not interesting. I love Luke Skywalker because he's everyone we loved to be when we were younger. We were basically that young kid. We wanted more in life. We wanted to have adventure. We wanted to see so much. But we faced struggles. We got upset. We were sad. We lost people. We basically had a difficult upbringing in points in our lives. We all have that in some form. But he plowed through it in the end. He became stronger because of it, and he became the great Jedi. That's so much there that you can cheer for. With Rey, she basically learns all of this in the span of a year. And with Finn too. Again, problems with handling the vision. Finn started off as a turncoat stormtrooper, and where he could have gone next with his character was be entertaining regardless, because that concept alone is worth exploring. But they just chucked it out the door halfway through the first part of the movie so they could just make him the comic relief. Good comic relief, but again, where to go after that? With Last Jedi, they just pushed him into a pointless subplot, really, so they could almost repeat his arc from the first film again. And now we get with this film, and we find out that he's Force sensitive. They heavily imply it. They don't outright say it, but you can tell that's what the J.J. Abrams was going for. And I'm just left wondering, wouldn't this have been so much better if this was in Last Jedi, and this film was the culmination of that? It was Finn and Rey teaming up with Kylo or whatever to face the big threat of this trilogy. That would have been make more sense. But instead, again, we're just going back to Last Jedi and how that basically effed up everything for this series. I guess overall for the characters, for the overall part of this section really, and I guess the story too, because I'm sure I've just gone off a bit of a tangent again, but I guess overall, for those parts of it, the story is pretty much trying to do catch-up. It's trying to do 2 movies worth of story into one, and it doesn't give it time to breathe. It doesn't give you a chance to really take in everything, and it just feels very rushed. And the characters, with how they started off and where they've all gone with this story, it just feels like, yeah, some of it's fun, and you can look at it all in isolation and find enjoyment from it, but it doesn't really feel natural. And in doing so, you question a lot of the decisions, a lot of the scenes going on. And if you don't like that, if it takes you out of the movie like that, it's not fun. So I guess, overall, again, you can probably tell, really, I'm passionate about this, but I'm not really in the mood, because, again, I've not really been a fan of Star Wars in a while because of Last Jedi, and because of so much other things that have gone on with this saga. And in the end, overall, I'm just tired. I'm tired of being let down by all these properties that I grew up with that have the potential to tell great stories. And they're just being misused because, for reasons. And, yeah. I'm just going to end this here, sorry. Probably not the best video, and quite frankly, this is not how I wanted this final review of the year to be. But, this is just one of those days, and I'm hoping actually when I can finally get down to doing the Star Wars podcast next year, I'll be able to vent my thoughts then in an official way. But for an overall verdict of this movie, I can say that Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is a 5 out of 10 below average, in my opinion. It's an alright blockbuster with some brilliant effects and CGI, and casual viewers, if you turn off your brain, you can get some enjoyment out of this. However, for me, as a Star Wars fan, being a Star Wars film, and the third and final chapter of this sequel trilogy and the final installment of the saga overall, the Skywalker saga, this just feels a complete mess of a movie. In the end, I can just shake my head, really, and just say, how did it come to this? And because regardless of where you stand with Force Awakens, there was good setup in there. We could complain about how the treatment of Han was done, and how Rey started off as a Mary Sue, and the discarding of Finn's potential as the next Stormtrooper. However, it could be all accepted because it was the payoff and the years of expectations that was given to us for the next 2 films that we looked forward to. And instead, Last Jedi just chucked that all in the bin, and it made it all grind to a halt. And as such, we now have this film that basically tries to pick up its old threads and try and say this was all connected. It was all part of this grand plan. And it just shows so much. The Rise of Skywalker is a result of what you get when you refuse to plan out your trilogy ahead of everything and refuse to stick to what vision you conceived. And more so, when you basically make the fans angry, really, when you try to blame them for the problems, and it just doesn't work. They're the main source of income. They're the people that you're making this movie for. So you're not exactly making them any favours by making them the villains. I'm overall just disappointed. In the end, I expected so much more. I'm sure people will say the same. Again, there's much more bigger platforms out there who can likely give deeper details into why this movie doesn't work. But for me, I'm just annoyed that what could have been one of the best final chapter trilogies of one of the greatest PRs ever was just made because they wanted to do their own thing with the drive of money. And yeah, every movie franchise always is driven by money, but when you have a vision, that makes it so much more accessible and understandable, and you can see the passion behind it. And there's passion behind this movie and the other 3 movies, the 2 movies, but the lack of a vision just does show through, and it does feel very hollow. And considering how the fans were treated, it just feels like they wanted to do something that wasn't for everyone. If it's still in theatres, and if you fancy seeing something for the holiday season, I'd give it a watch, but I'm not exactly going to be cheering on for this movie. And in a way, I'm actually kind of glad it's not getting high praise like the last 2. I'm glad that people have voiced their problems with it. Because hopefully that means when the next trilogy comes along and when all's said and done, hopefully there'll be the people behind these films will be able to say, yeah, we see what we did wrong, and let's make it better. Let's do a new trilogy that actually has a story, that has meaning, and in the end of the day, it feels like it was a direction that we were leading to all along. But it's just so frustrating and sad that the trilogy that they chose to muck up was the sequel trilogy. The story of what happened to our heroes after the war. And I can only hope that maybe one day we can see something different. Maybe I will check out the EU one day officially. Maybe I'll see their stories and adventures of Han, Luke and Leia after the Battle of Endor. Because every time I do think of what came afterwards in this timeline, it's just more sad. And you would have thought Star Wars would have wanted to make everyone happy and unite everyone. This final story, this final battle, and everyone has a happy ending in some form. Not always, I guess. So I guess, yeah, this will be my final video of 2019. And yeah, I think it's pretty obvious here. Not the best video and review, really, I've made. Heck, I even think my Doctor Sleep video was better than this one, because it actually had a more structure to it. But again, I'm just not in... I'm in one of those bad moods today. It's busy end of the year. But yeah, thanks for tuning in a lot. It's been fun. And thank you all to my co-hosts for being part of this series so far. And I look forward to doing more next year. So, thanks for everything, guys. I'm Kobi, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.